Okay, so let's see how we find the last row of your data with AppScript. So let's start with the basic method. So the basic method is this, right? So first let's get our spreadsheet to a variable. So we'll go hit app. Nope. Get active sheet, and we'll call it our spreadsheet. It's good enough. So that's basically our active sheet, really, not spreadsheet, but I'm just gonna leave it SS, doesn't matter. So we're gonna take that SS, and then if we look through our methods, there's actually a method called getLastRow or getLastColumn. So if we do getLastRow, that should return an integer. So I'm gonna give this variable a name LR, and let's just log this out. LR and semicolon. So if I run this, keep in mind, if you are running this for the first time, you may need to give permissions for the app script to run. Hopefully, if you made it to this video, you already know that stuff. But now that I ran this, if I look through my logs, see it says 5. So if I go back and look, 5 is actually accurate. So that usually works for something like this, but let's try to expand this a little bit. So what if we have some numbers here? And then we made this formula. We're gonna do if this is not, well, let's just do this. If it is blank, then let's leave it blank. Otherwise, let's do a formula. Let's take this number and, I don't know, multiply it by this. Close parentheses, hit enter. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit just to make sure you can actually see what I'm doing here. So that's my formula, right? So if this cell is blank, we're gonna leave it blank. Otherwise, we're gonna multiply those numbers together. So that's 30, and I'm just gonna drag this down until row 15. So basically now this formula is gonna leave it blank when it's blank, and it's gonna fill the formula when it's not. So now let's run our thing again. And now you can see we get the actual last row where the formula is, not the last row of the data. So this method now is going to return 15, even though these are kind of blank, but because we have a formula filling that in, it's still going to get that as a result. So you may get this when you get a query function getting results. It will get some extra things. So there are a lot of situations when this might be happening. You may also have this problem. So I'm just going to delete this for now. We may need to come back to this. But actually, I'm just going to keep this like this. I'm just going to make a duplicate of this. Let me delete this again. So another possible situation, now if we run this, it should be 5, hopefully. Let's first of all test that. Command enter, control enter should bring us this 5. So that's correct, the 5th row. However, most spreadsheets aren't very consistent with the way the data is laid out. So if somebody has some comments or some other information on this other side of your spreadsheet, now what's going to happen when we run this? We're going to get 12 because, well, this is the line. So now because we have this other data on the right side, this is not accurate for our data set anymore. So one way to rectify this problem is to use a different method here. So once I get my active sheet, I'm going to take that variable SS, and then I'm going to get the range, And by the range, I'm going to get me a starting cell. Let's say this is where my data starts, A1. So I'm going to get that range right here, A1. And then I'm going to use this method that's called getDataRegion. And that should return this range. Now to make sure that's what we're getting, let's just use this method get A1 notation as text. And now this should be the actual A1 notation. That's the range. So let's run this and see what we get. So see, it says A1 through C5. That's our data range, A1 through C5. That's correct. So this method is actually pretty nice. Now, if I'm adding more information here, so let's just do this, like this, something like this. If I run this, that's going to get me A1 through C7, as you can see, which is correct. Now, if we add another cell here on the right, see, right there. So if we run this, let's take a look. It says A1 through D7. So now we have this included. That's perfect. So this works most of the time, with exception that sometimes it's kind of weird. So let's try something like this. So I'm going to run this. And it says A1 through D7. Now let's look at our data. A1 through D7 would be this. This was not included in our data. So it's kind of like if it's like on a side like this, it's not including as a part of your data set. Although if you have probably like a cell that's filled in here, now if I run this, it will probably include it. There it is, A1 through E8, which is now correct. So with exception of some very weird cases like this should be fine. Another case where it's not fine is where we have, let's say, a blank row. So if we have a blank row or a blank column, that will automatically just separate our data. So now if I run this and look at the log, A1 through D4, see, that's getting from here through here. That's our data set, and the blank row, it's kind of taking that second part as a separate data set. Now, the last thing I want to test, I'm going to delete that blank row. What if we actually have column labels for every column? So I'm going to go col1 and go from here through here. Let's see if this works and if it includes this with no problem. So I'm going to go here, run this, log A1 through E8, A1, E8. So that's nice. So if we have column numbers on top and we don't have the blank row problem, we should be fine with this method. So let's just try to do something like this. So let's say these are my columns and some columns are blank and we have this. Let's see what we get out of that. A1 through E8. Nice. So where we're at right now is that if we have a label for each column on top with our data set, then this method of getting our data is actually gonna work pretty nice. We're gonna give a starting cell, then we're gonna get the region. But what we wanted was the last row, not the A1 notation. Now to fix that problem, we're just gonna change this to get last row. And if I run this, that's 8. So now I have 8, my last row. So this is a much nicer method of now getting the last row compared to just the last row. The other thing with this method is that if I go back here and remember this whole formula thing, scrolling down. So if I run this on this data set, if I look, see it says row 5 is the last one. So it doesn't include this formula stuff. So that's that. Now the problem we're going to still have is what if we have blank rows in our data. And what if that's the case? So if we have a blank row in our data, it should be 4 as the last column. So let's see. And there it is. So to go around this, we're going to have to write some extra code to get the last row. So this is that. Now let's go back to this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to first get this entire thing as far as necessary to an array. And to do that, well, there are multiple ways to do that. One way, we can just get to our sheet and get range. And then I'm going to choose A1 notation. That would be one method to do this. And I'll go from A1 through E, A1 through E open-ended. And that means, I guess, all the way down. And we're going to do get values to put that whole thing in an array. So let's do our range and save. Let's take a look what's in there for a second. And if I run this, if I look at the log, see, basically we get all those blanks all the way down in our spreadsheet. So we got from here through here, E column, and then basically all the way down. So what we're going to do now, we're going to go from the bottom and we're going to keep checking if all the columns in this range are blank, and we're going to keep going up, 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 up until we find the first one when the columns in the range we selected are not blank. And we're going to basically say that's the last row. So to do this, we're going to create a for loop. And we have to make sure that in this loop, we start from the bottom and we go up instead of going from the top and going down, because we want to find the first non-blank row in the data from the bottom, not from the top, because we could have this one blank too, but we want to get this row. So to do that, we're going to do set a variable here, and we're going to start from the bottom end. And to get the bottom end, that's going to be the length of our array -1, because array index starts from 0. So if there are 1000 rows in an array, if we start the count from 0, that's 999. So that's where we start. To do semicolon, we're going to keep going as long as that I is greater than 0 or greater than equal to 0. So we're going to go all the way to 0, right? So equal to 0. Oh, not less than, greater than. We're going to decrement that I by 1. So we're going to decrease I by 1 every time. So we're going to start with 999. We're going to keep going until we hit 0 in our array. So now we're going to have a row as the variable. So if I just do var row equals to, that's going to be from this range. I want the row that we're currently in. So range I would give me the current row. So the first time it's going to be the last one. And what we need to do in this row, we need to make sure that every single argument in that row is blank. And this row is going to be an array. Just to make sure you understand this, let's just log the row. And if I save this and run this, look at my log. See, it's each row as an array, and it keeps going. And hopefully at some point we're going to get some data. There it is. Now, in this array, we need to check if every single one of them is blank. And if it's blank, we're going to move to the next one, right? So the way we're going to do that, we're going to take that row. And because it's an array, we're going to have every method on that. And with every method, we're going to have the function. And again, if you don't understand every method, you should watch my video on this. And we're going to pass every cell as an argument here in this function, and we're going to return a logical true or false. We're going to check if that C is blank. So this is going to give me true if the whole thing is blank. What I have to do, I have to wrap this inside of an if function. So let's just create a variable here. Something like this. I'm going to create an if function. I'm going to say if the whole thing is blank, then the way we want to approach this, we want to just set a variable on top. So I'm going to create a variable last row, and I'm going to say my last row equals to, actually I'm going to call it last row index because technically it's not the last row. So I'm going to say last row index equals to I. Right? So we want to make sure that we set our last row to I. And as I'm going through this, I changed my mind. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to set the last row to I right in the beginning. And then I'm going to do the rest of the logic. So first I'm going to set the last row to the row we're currently in. So let's say we're in row, whatever, the last one right now. And we're going to set it to 1002. And then we're going to check, is the whole thing blank? And if it's blank, we want to go to the next one and do this over again. And we're going to set that so on and so on and so on until we are here. And then when we're in this 10, which is the last row, it's already going to be set to 10. And we're going to check if every one of them is blank. And if it isn't, this is going to give us false. So I'm going to take that false and add an exclamation sign in front of it, and it's going to make it true. So now I've reversed my logic. So basically, at least one of them has something in it. If that's the case, we want to get out of this loop. So we're going to break out of the loop. And what we're going to have, so break is going to stop the loop at this point. So we're going to check now what is the index. So if I run this, it should be right below what we need. So see, it says 9. So if we look here, it should have been 10. And the reason it says 9 is because remember, we have, this is an array. And arrays start from 0. So the count goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But the way we count in Google Sheets starts from 1. So we always have to add 1 to this index to get the last row. So as an end result, our last row should be this plus 1. And I don't think I had a variable for it, so I guess I'm going to set it. That's going to be this. I'm going to simplify this a little bit. One thing I'm going to do, instead of having this as a separate line, I'm just going to copy this whole thing that gives me this is blank. And I'm going to replace this is blank with this. Get rid of that. We set our last row to I, and we also have this row, which is the same as this. So instead of doing all of that, I can just replace this row with this and get rid of this line. So that should give us the same thing. Let's run this. I forgot to log our results. Let's see what we have. 10. Perfect. So now we were able to get the 10. Now if we have something in here, that should give us 14. Let's try here. Let's give us like 16. Perfect. So that gives us 16. So now I would probably want to move it to its own function, because this is something that we might be doing a lot, getting the last row. So to move this to a function, we're going to create a function. We're going to call it get last row. And here we basically need most of this, if not all of it. Here we go. And in this function, I'm going to accept arguments. One is going to be the worksheet. I'm going to call it variable sheet. And the second one is going to be range string. So that will be this. Now, instead of doing this to get our active sheet, I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to use that sheet variable that the function is going to give us here. Range A1 through E, only instead of that, we're going to just pass the range that the user is going to provide us. And then we're going to get those values. We're going to set our last row index as a variable. We're going to get the last row. Although we don't need to get it, we'll simply just return this. Now we probably could build some error checking and stuff like that, but I'm just going to leave it to you, I guess, if you want to improve on this. But now let's just use this. I'm going to take this, go back here. Now to use this function, what we need to do, we need to, well, I don't need any of this stuff. I just have to get my spreadsheet to a variable, and then I will create a variable LR, and I'll make it equal to, so the sheet is going to be that SS, and the range as the string I'm going to pass to that is going to be A1 through E, I guess. That's what we had, A1 through E, just like that. And hopefully that will get us the last row, and this should give us what we need. So let's run this function. Do the log, and we get 16 as the last row. Here we go. And that's because I chose from this column to this column. Now, if I do, so let's actually do something like this. Zoom out just a little bit. Now, if I run this, it's still going to give us 16. Because we're getting through E column. Now, if I include, let's say, G in there, A1 through G, that's the area we're checking this in. I run this. I look, and it says 18 as the last row, right? And that's 18 because, well, this is where it is. Now, it doesn't even have to be here. So if we do this, see a little separate there, that should give us 19. So let's run that and verify. And there it is. That's 19. Now that doesn't have to be our active sheet, right? We can get our sheet by the name. So I can say, let me check in here, what's the last row? So if I wanted to go from A1 through F area, so I'm going to go A1 through F. And here as sheet, I'm going to go get sheet by name. And then the name of this sheet is sheet 1. And then I'm going to move to this tab. So we know that we're running a different sheet. And now we store it in this variable SS. We pass it to our function and we give a range. And now if I run, I'll look at the log, it says 5. So, and that's here, the 5th row. And remember the formula thing we had here, the if function, it doesn't care about that. A few ways to get the last row. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.